The water wars are coming sooner than you think, but not in the way you think. Now, as a disclaimer, before I get into this, this is just my brief 2 cents. It's a quick take with some brief research and reading that I did. It does not constitute advice, financial or otherwise. And I'm not a climate scientist or a water economist or anything of the sort, so, take it with a grain of salt. But, anyways, to explain sort of what I mean and what I think about this, one way you can think of the world is you can think of sort of our global sort of macro level institutions in terms of two spheres. One is states, so governments, the political side of things, your societies, and the other is markets, so the financial system, your economy. So states and markets, it's a useful dichotomy in terms of thinking of the world and its broad macro institutions. And I think when we think about water conflict or the coming water wars, which is, I think, a phrase or a concept a lot of people are familiar with, especially because of climate change, global warming, it's something that's come up for, I think, everybody at least at some point in the last few years. But I think when we think of water war, we think immediately of these sort of apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic scenarios of countries at war, societies at war over water resources. But my thesis basically is that before we get to that point, that conflict over water as a resource will begin in the markets. Uh, so before you get to the point of water being so scarce that nations are going to war over water for their citizens or for even as a resource for productive reasons as well, uh, the sort of the canary in the coal mine in this context is that there will be conflict over resource distribution of water in the marketplace, so between corporations, between industries, between different companies. Which is not to say that we're far away or that, state level war over conflict is that far away. We're already on the road there. Um, but that's a separate video. And in terms of where in the market do I think this is going to happen, I think if we can make more sense of this thinking of, everyone's favorite buzzword nowadays and a big and exciting chunk of the stock market nowadays and of, the global market in general in terms of forward-looking outlooks and excitement is artificial intelligence. This report from the UN actually, for example, shows you just how big AI is and is going to be. So according to the report, the global market for AI will increase from 189 billion US dollars in 2023 to 4.8 trillion dollars worth of US dollars in 2033. That's, I believe, roughly greater than a 25 times increase over 10 years, which is insane. And even currently, Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft each have a market value of roughly 3 trillion US dollars. That rivals the entire GDP of all of Africa, which is insane. And again, like I mentioned in the first point, that's only growing. So the industry is growing, which means that as the output as the value of the industry increases, so as the value of AI in the marketplace increases, that means its output is increasing, its valuation is increasing. And for output and valuation to increase, that's going to necessarily have a correlation with its inputs increasing. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So in terms of how this is relevant to resource conflict and water conflict specifically, all AI relies upon and requires, it needs these data centers. And I'm using some slides from IBM's website here to explain what that is and what that looks like. So according to IBM, what is a data center? An AI data center is a facility that houses the specific IT infrastructure that is needed to train, deploy, and deliver AI applications and services. So again, the infrastructure you need to build and maintain AI is what we're talking about here. And it's important also to note that an AI data center is slightly different from traditional data centers used for other software and equipment. They're similar, but you can see here in the second paragraph, the differences between these two kinds of data centers stem from the extraordinary demands of high-intensity AI workloads. So the demands, the inputs are much higher. Most importantly, these data centers generate a lot of heat and need to be cooled down. That requires the use of a lot of water. And I'm using it to cool it down. And I'm using here a report from Ethical GEO or Ethical Geo. I don't know how they go. Um, which just shows you how much water these AI data centers are currently using. So cloud computing is drying out rivers, lakes, and oceans. The average 100 megawatt data center consumes about 2 million liters of water a day, equivalent to the water consumption of 6,500 American households. Globally, data centers consume around 560 billion liters of water annually, or the equivalent of 224,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So this is an insanely high amount of water usage. And you can even find, if you look, there's an interview of, I believe, Sam Altman, talking about how much water ChatGPT uses, and for every, I think, ChatGPT prompt, he said it uses like a drop of water or a millimeter of water. But you can also see experts saying that that might be an underestimate, and that also, sorry, that's an alarm of mine. That also only takes into account direct water consumption and not indirect water consumption, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this video. Cooling techniques vary between data centers, but the most common method is evaporative cooling, where warm water is drawn through wet pads. Data centers, and this is important, data centers evaporate 80% of the water drawn and discharge 20% to wastewater treatment. So, for comparison, residential evaporative cooling loses only 10% of the water to evaporation. So now when you think about water usage, there's two types of water usage. There's consumptive versus non-consumptive uses of water. So a non-consumptive use of water is that which can go back into the system pretty much immediately. So if, for example, an industry uses some water and then that wastewater can get recycled back directly into the stream and be used either at the same level or further downstream, then that's non-consumptive. But in evaporative, what that means is that the water is basically lost until it re-enters the water cycle as precipitation or otherwise. So it's hard, it takes longer to replenish and it's not immediately available for use, and that's important. And as we can see, so AI data centers, the important takeaways here, AI data centers use a lot of water, and 80% of the water they use is consumed. So it's a highly consumptive. Additionally, you can see here, by far the most common use of the most common water use is potable water. This is drinking water, basically. So clean drinking water, because the quality of water is really important for cooling AI data centers. They can't use poor quality water or reclaimed water because that can cause corrosion, scaling, or microbial growth. So not only is the amount of water used high, the amount of drinkable water used is extremely high. Now to make it more relevant to what I'm talking about in terms of resource competition, already you can see that in the United States, this is Bloomberg News I'm quoting here, which finds that about 2/3 of new data centers built in or in development since 2022 are in places already gripped by high levels of water stress. So water is, of course, it's not infinite, right? There's a certain amount of water, and you can be consumptive or non-consumptive in its use. So there's only X amount of water that you can use for Y amount of things. AI data centers already use a large amount of water, and they're located in regions where the water sources are already being depleted, which are already water scarce regions, which are already, in some cases, have been experiencing a drought or drought-like conditions for several years. These are the 5 states in question from the Bloomberg report. Which brings me to the next point, cotton. So if there is a finite resource and there's multiple ways you could use that resource, then then the competition arises as a result of the question of, okay, who gets to use that resource, or in what percentage do we divvy up this pie? And in terms of the United States' relationship with cotton, the United States has consistently been one of the largest exporters of cotton. There's been several years where it has been the #1 exporter of cotton in the world. So it's a very big producer of cotton. You can see here a report also of the top producing cotton countries. Even recently, as 2024, 2025, the United States produces 12% of cotton in the world is produced in the United States of America. So it's a very big industry for the United States. It's not their #1 industry, and that's kind of relevant, but it is a very large industry. And importantly, before I move on to the next slide, importantly, cotton is also a thirsty crop. That means cotton, compared to other crops, also uses a lot of water. And like with AI data centers, cotton water usage is also consumptive. It's not as consumptive, I believe, as AI data centers is, but it's also consumptive. And this also highlights why I think there's going to be competition for water as a resource, particularly between these two industries. But this is just one single use case. Because again, water is a finite resource that you can only use a certain amount of, especially if it's consumptive. So if you have a certain amount of water, it can either be used by an AI data center or by X amount of farmland, right? And it can't be used by both because both are consumptive. So if you use it for the cotton, there's not much water left to use in the AI data center and vice versa because both are highly consumptive. And you can see here, these are two maps which compare states which have large cotton production. And you can see also the Bloomberg map, which shows you water-stressed regions with AI data centers. And you can see there's an unfortunate amount of overlap between these two maps. Here also we have a report by the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. And you can see that in the second line, they said that the lower production of cotton in the United States is associated with drought conditions in recent years. So there's already higher abandonment rates, lower cotton yields to some degree due to drought conditions, due to water scarcity. And if competition increases, that could potentially get worse. From the perspective of policymakers and the US economy, if water is finite as is and it's becoming scarce in these regions, um, a decision has to be made. Increasingly, you cannot give large amounts of water to both cotton producers and to AI data centers. So a decision will have to be made in terms of which has priority. And given the tremendously large value that artificial intelligence brings and is expected to bring to the United States market and to global markets, I think the decision will be in favor of AI data centers and in AI's position of dominance in the marketplace. So I think cotton producers and farmers are going to suffer in the coming years and in the coming decades from higher water scarcity, from lack of access to resources. The caveat also, of course, is things could change. So a lot of AI companies and AI data centers are focusing on how to be water neutral or water positive, or to come up with ways to cool AI data centers which are less consumptive, if at all. There's also cotton crops already recently have been developed, which are less thirsty, so which will use less water than historically water crops do. And these things could help, right? So if you need less water for the cotton crops, if you need less water for the AI data centers, then that resolves the issue to a large degree. But the question is, what is the timeline for those things, and if it's feasible? Uh, Personally, based on everything I've read, I don't think that AI data centers using less water currently is highly feasible. Um, the reason for that is, if you look at it, it seems that a lot of AI companies and AI data centers have not been consistent or very clear in counting or measuring how much water they use for these things. So if we're not even clear about how much water is being used, it doesn't seem to me like it's a priority to fix the issue. So I expect the sort of competition to heighten and increase. I expect cotton producers to suffer, and I think of this not as the only case of conflict over water as a resource in markets, but it's just a simple use case to um, express my thesis, which is again that conflict over water as a resource will begin in markets before moving to states. But again, I'm not an expert climate scientist nor a water economist, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.